the narrative has taken hold. The psychological warfare has locked in, and people just take it as, you know, to the point you raise. It's just like greed is good.
Para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando. ¡Viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
This is a quote, by the way, Milton Friedman. He looks like the bad guy in every scary movie.
In everything.
He looks like the evil villain in his office in a spinning chair. Quote, "The world runs on individuals pursuing their self-interest. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus." Well, what about the Soviet Union and the 5-year plans that carried out the fastest industrialization in human history? What about the Chinese Revolution that liberated millions of enslaved women in particular from serfdom and feudalism and concubines in Tibet? What about the Cuban Revolution that liberated Cubans from US-backed dictatorship? There's so many examples. What about Mozambique,
you could even,
Angola?
But even here, here, it's public funding that funds all the research that they then patent and privatize. It's funding in workers programs that created for a time impressive construction and architecture and technology and electric grid building and damming and all the things that you need to build and advance at least capitalist society. So, I mean, that's all public funding. That's all. And, so anyway, so, I mean, even if you don't want to attach yourself to the horrors of the Cuban Revolution, you could just say, look at what happens anytime the federal government gets involved, good things happen. Even from the perspective of an American capitalist. That's not necessarily anybody else, but that's anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of the idealist aspects of libertarianism, free market capitalism that Sowell, Friedman, and all these other people promote is the non-aggression principle. In their minds, any sort of aggression is carried out by the state is bad, and that in this free market utopia, there is no aggression between people. It's just individual people doing their own individual things without recognizing that force is inherent in the universe. If there is no central government, if there is no state that's maintaining order, there's going to be a private entity that carries that responsibility no matter what. And if we look at right-wing neoliberal countries with very small governments, we see that happen. For example, 2 examples in the Western Hemisphere that stand out, Haiti and Honduras, which historically have had very small governments. You've had the rise of neoliberalism, coups against people like Jean-Bertrand Aristide, against Manuel Zelaya, and anybody who has tried to expand the government and have a people's movement. And what happens is in places like Haiti or Honduras or in many countries around the world that are free market capitalist systems, instead of a government maintaining order, you have either narco gangs, you have paramilitary groups, you have these different institutions that take over and maintain that order. So it just shows you that this idea of the non-aggression principle is complete nonsense. In any society, you're always going to have force. You're always going to have some sort of institution that comes in and claims power over everything else. And I think it just shows also the satanic nature of libertarianism, where the individual is the individual greed is the highest pinnacle of achievement, that it doesn't matter if it hurts somebody else, as long as you're following your individual desires and wants, that is good, that is greatness. Very much in line with what Nietzsche talks about, the will to power, that society is driven by greed and the will to accomplish more and power individually and not collectively. And it's just anti-scientific. If we look at all of the developments of human history, it's all been collective. I mean, humans are collective social beings. We've only been able to achieve all of these great advancements in science, engineering, through human ingenuity together in problems, right? When we're in a problem collectively as human beings, when we're in crisis, we come together and find a solution. It's not just these individual human beings finding solutions on their own. And I think this is even within my own family, within people who I know that are not really political, that kind of follow a lot of this capitalist propaganda. They say, greed is human nature, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. And just do you, right? What is your response to that kind of argument?
Well, I mean, to the point you made earlier, whether it made it in a Marxist framework or not, I mean, people are a product of their environment.
Yeah.
And in fact, most people are not greedy. This is why a few people who relatively are and who are induced to that greed and have any tendency to it that any of us might have, just stoked and fed and encouraged. But that's why they're able to get away with it, because most people are not thinking like that. I mean, I always think of it like, I mean, the first time I remember I had, as a kid playing a board game, playing the game Risk, if people remember, where you're supposed to mass armies and put pieces on the.
I love that game.
And I looked, but I remember I as a little kid, I looked up in this boy and I just realized he was cheating. He was just like dumping his armies wherever. He was just like whatever, no matter what. And it shocked me. Like I was so innocent and naive. Like how it would have never occurred to me. And that's why I was so slow catching it. I was like, dang, how does he keep, what am I missing? And then he just started laughing, and I got mad, kicked knocked the game over, stormed down. I don't think we were ever friends again. Like I was like, that's it. That's the
like revolution.
I took it hard. Yeah, I was like, that's it. The game's over. I was like, I knock your armies up. But the point is, I mean, I just think in a microcosmic, childish kind of way, that is how I think they get away with it, because the rest of us are not that way. If we were all genuinely that greedy, the species would have died out. To your point,
exactly.
The only reason we got this far is because people are not that greedy, and tendencies toward that have been checked in the best parts of societies around the world. And in others not checked so much at all, and in fact encouraged in the other way. And then that mythology does come to play and is propagated again through everything, through very sophisticated psychological warfare down to just very sort of aggressive pop cultural film and commercials. I mean, even just recently with these crypto the Matt Damon commercial in particular, that was, even a joke for a couple weeks, was, just this overt, if you're bold, if you're a real man, if you're tough, you'll buy crypto, because that's,
right.
That's how you do it. That's the bold, and the fortune favors the and all of that. It's just another propagated, you gotta be that. And even the whole thing, I'm even just watching stuff about dogs and stuff, how to best care for dogs, and this whole the whole alpha thing that has been taken into hyper speed out here in these YouTube streets, with being an alpha male and all this other stuff, is based on bogus research. It's like, and the guy that started it said it's not real. Like, he's like, I messed up. I've revised, my thesis, and it doesn't matter. The story's already, the narrative has taken hold. The psychological warfare has locked in, and people just take it as, to the points you raise. It's just like greed is good, as what's his name said in whichever McCall movie. I mean, that's it's
crazy. And even like in art, it's also reflected with postmodernism, because you have these two major movements within art during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. You have the rise of realism, socialist realism in particular, in the Soviet Union, China, and in Mexico, Siqueiros, who was one of the most famous socialist realist painters, depicting very clear images of people working together in groups, collectives, all in one, very clear message, very political, working class art. And then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you had the CIA funding all of this postmodern art where it was just like blobs of paint and abstract and like an eye here and a random can of soup over there that only individual people can understand. And that's where art became very snobby, and people were like, oh, only intellectuals can understand it. The Cultural Cold War. Oh, that looks like a really good book.
Oh
What's
yeah,
that
I
about?
thought because it's about what you're talking about. It's about the post World War II. Well, about a number of different things related to that, but in particular, the way the CIA funded the art world all around the world to do just what you're talking about. And I was just looking to see if I could find the quick page, but you know, I wasn't ready. And I always refer back to that book. It's one of my favorites. But she talks about Frances Stoner Saunders, about the promotion of individualism, specifically to blunt the rise of communism in the world. They even did it to hip hop, by the way, by taking the original elements and reducing them to the one MC. They've wiped out the collective in the art.
Oh, anyway. Most definitely. And it makes me think of like the original iPod ads, where it's like you have even the little letter I. It's like iPod. Everything is like the little I next to whatever it is, and then you have like individual people listening to their individual music, and the hyper individualism of capitalism. I just find to be really disgusting, right? And it's interesting because if you go to other countries around the world, if you go to, in particular, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it's much more collective. And in many ways, a lot of this propaganda is designed to break down the collective, break down tribal communities that have existed for thousands of years, and promote the individual, have everyone hunched over their screens and not hanging out with people. And it's just crazy to me. I'm glad you mentioned the psychological component to it, because that's such a important part of it, and it complements a lot of the economics.